pressure. That's where most leadership mistakes begin. Welcome to the Mental Business Podcast. And today we have a guest on that's going to talk about, well, let me just give you the bit of a bridge to the episode. This episode is going to explore how psychological pressures influence judgment inside business leadership. And we've got Eugene Farrell here today. Eugene, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lewis.
So, Eugene, mental health and well-being specialist consulting, former mental health consulting lead at AXA Health. It sounds like you know your stuff when it comes to mental health and well-being, pal.
Well, I hope so. I spent 30 years in the field, working with large organisations, small organisations, all around the world. So I've seen a few things.
Yeah, I think what's interesting for the Mental Business Podcast is we get a lot of business owners, not just business owners, the next generation professionals that are coming through. And it all sounds good when we've got a nice strategy and plan in place. But I've got a good saying is that, what's this? The hard skills and the soft skills. Yeah. The soft skills are the easy part until the people show up.
Oh, well, often people can be the source of many frustrations and difficulties, I guess. And that includes ourselves because, we're all a person too. And we're a work in progress all the time. And we're never finished. And we always need to grow. And we're always growing and changing because we learn as we go along. I'm very much not the same person that I was when I was 20 or 30 or 40 or even 50. I won't tell you exactly how old I am, but I'm older than that. And so I earned these lines on my face, through experiences. And I think it's interesting that we might expect a lot of ourselves very, very early on, that we should know everything. And actually, I've worked with a lot of managers over the years, and I'll often say to them, look, you've not been exposed to every situation. So you don't have a reference for that. And there's only so much you can read about situations. It's actually doing them, I think, have become really, really important. And no two situations are ever the same anyway. So your past decision making may not be necessarily, the guide that you need for the current decision making. So, we can't expect to know everything, and don't be too hard on ourselves if actually we don't have a reference point to work to when we feel a bit stumped by something, or we're not quite sure or confident about what we're doing in any particular situation. We're none of us perfect.
Well, this is it. And I think one of the main reasons why I shifted the podcast brand to Mental Business Podcast is because of exactly what you've just mentioned there. It's okay not to be perfect. And in a world where we think that everything needs to be perfect, I mean, I work with a lot of the MBA students at different universities, and, they've got exams that they have to pass and the pressure. And, it's more moving towards today's world of like, well, this is what it's going to be like in university, but what's the real world going to be like? I think it puts a lot of unnecessary pressure and also stops potential when they're under this pressure. People have got so much potential, but that acts as like a distortion, a disruption in potential when pressure applies. What's your take on this? And what have you seen working for AXA and the businesses you consulted with? What are you seeing?
Well, you see a lot of really experienced managers who have earned it along the way, and they're very calm with things, and that they make it look really easy. And that's born out of, as I said before, that's born out of their experiences. It's born out of also their personality and the way that they approach things. And also it can be born out of the training that you might have had along the way that really could help you. So that's and when you're working with managers who are maybe less experienced, what they're looking at is a really good examples, and there often isn't the time to mentor people through how to do things. And they're not explaining as they go along, this is my decision making, this is how I thought about this is why I did this. That just doesn't really happen. So what happens is they see a really good example of doing things, making it look really easy. And that brings that pressure. It's like, how comes that they can do that? And it's very easy for them, and I don't feel the same in those situations. And that really high level of example does put pressure on people to try and perform in that particular way. But you also get this kind of overly critical part, where, as you just said, the expectation is really high. And if you over expect, and your personality is very driven, that you almost punish yourself around things that you don't think you do as well as you probably are doing, then it feels like a lot more pressure than it maybe needs to be. So you're trying to learn, you're trying to copy examples that are really really good. I mean, there are some not so good ones, believe me. I've seen plenty of not great examples of how to do things that have made me wince over the years. But generally things are good. But if your examples are really good and you're overly punishing yourself, you're striving in a way that puts blockers, and difficulties in front of you that maybe don't need to be there if you could approach it in a different way. I see a lot of that. And I see managers kind of, and even entrepreneurs looking around, trying to find a way, and they don't really have a way forward because they've not experienced some of these things before.
Yeah.
And I've seen people cripple themselves into failure. The over criticism, that just creates such a barrier that then can create a failure for them, and they start to break down themselves by putting so much pressure on that
Wow.
doesn't necessarily need to be there, when they could manage things slightly differently maybe.
Yeah, well, this is it, right? Because mental health and well-being obviously very critical in the workplace and in everyone's world as well. I mean, the business is just a vehicle for your life. You're talking about lives here. But what you're
Yes.
talking about here is how it affects the strategic direction of any company or business as well, right? Because that sort of
Yes.
pressure internally, the invisible pressures that we see from, I mean, I've got a lot of senior leaders that run companies for me now, and when you hire them in a job interview, you think, oh, wait, this bulletproof person, they're going to come in, they've got like this 30, 40 years experience in what they've done. And what we start to see is that they were coming, but then they're in front of a lot of pressure from younger generations, maybe that are coming through, where they've got
Yeah.
all the knowledge of AI and things that's happening now, and then it's going, well, I don't know this stuff internally, but they've still got to be a leader, and it makes a big impact. These are invisible pressures that a lot of people aren't seeing that happen in real people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's the world's changing faster now than
Mm.
probably it ever has, I think. It certainly feels like that to me. It's that 30 years ago things were slower and worked in a different way. I think with technology now, and you mentioned AI is a very interesting kind of new area that I have a great passion for AI, by the way. It's something I'm really interested in, and I think it can be a great friend and help you if you use it in the right way. And maybe if we get time, we'll talk about that. But yeah, these invisible pressures are all there, and the fast moving pace, I think, of business is very different now, and resilience has to be very different. So you're mentioning somebody that you hired who looked really resilient, and resilience is a kind of toughness, mental toughness, and the ability to bounce back from situations.
Yeah.
um, and it's not inherent in all of us. And when I run sessions of about resilience, when I talk about resilience, I think it's important to know that we're not born, super resilient. We're not super person all of the time, and you can learn a lot of things along the way. You can learn skills. You can learn how to think differently. That creates more resilience for you. And I think those can be important lessons that you can get into. And as I said right at the beginning, we're all a work in progress. So if you identify ways that you're maybe not working as well as you might want, instead of being overcritical, you might want to step back from that a little bit. And both mentally, not physically step back, but sometimes sometimes that works as an action. But if you can mentally leave the situation and just step back out of it and then look back in, you can start to examine it in a very different way. And there's a really nice approach you can have, which is called curiosity. If you've never heard of curiosity.
You're trying to give us this big scientific model then, and then you came up with...
Well, it kind of comes, it does come from the psychological world. You become what's called a curious observer. Some people refer to it as being a curious scientist. So, and I like the scientist bit, but not everybody wants to be a scientist, but the scientist is about kind of being logical around the situation. So if you mentally step back from it, instead of having all the emotions whirling around that are going to affect the decision making. So the emotions are created, that affects your thinking, and then you make a decision based upon your reaction to that situation. But if you step back from it and become a curious observer looking into it, then you can start to observe it in a rational, different kind of way, for example. And that's one of those skills that you can learn as part of resilience. And this curiosity, then you start to change away from, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling that, to asking yourself questions. Why is that happening? Why did I make that decision at that particular moment? What was I feeling when I made that decision that drove me in that particular direction? And so you're reporting on yourself almost, which is a great part of self-reflection, but also helps you to analyze situations in a slightly different way. And you find that when you have this kind of psychological step back, the emotional parts of what's going on can start to drop away a little bit, because now we're outside of it. I used to talk about it a bit like, when you're on the tube in London, you're getting carried along. Emotions can be like this. You're on the tube, and this is your emotions, and they carry you along. And this happens with anger, for example. The anger builds up and it carries you along. You're whizzing along in the tube. What you're doing then is getting to a station and stepping back off that tube. Wow. And standing, and you're on the tube, on the platform, you're looking at the train. And you're watching the train go by, and you're asking then these sorts of questions instead of being carried along with it. So, when you talk about anger, that's how that can kind of carry you along, and you start making decisions in the wrong way. Well, you can make decisions based on other emotions. It may be fear, it may be something else from the past that's driving those emotions inside you. You may not even be able to name the emotions at the particular time, but they drive the behaviors, and the behaviors drive the outcome, I suppose, in the end. So if your decision making is based upon those emotions, it may be flawed. It may still work, but it may not be. Sometimes emotions are great for decisions, right? They can help, but sometimes they can get in the way.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I love this sort of stuff, and there's a lady in the science world, Barbara Fredrickson, that came up with the construct of core effect. So these are the, if everything was blank, imagine like the very spark of what comes into the brain before it goes through a filter of adding your information to it. Yeah. Okay. So this is a bit like, we haven't seen the picture yet, but we're flooding the room with a light before we even walk in the room, right? So the core effect is the emotion that comes up that then gives us the filter of what we're going to look through. And what she says is she does a lot of studying in this, and it happens in like the fraction of a millisecond that this emotion comes in. And what you're saying here, Eugene, is fascinating. I love this stuff, because just imagine the sort of pressures that entrepreneurs, leaders, they have to make decisions. They've got all the pressure of people looking up to them for, okay, yeah, you get different sort of people in businesses and corporations, right? People that think they know better, or they do know better. They're very clever people. But when, pardon my French, when the shit hits the fan, they need to go to, well, that's not me, and then get the leader in. And then the pressure's on the leader then to act as either the mentor or the person that's going to get them through this mess. And if that pressure is affecting that person on their judgment of how they're going to give this feedback, then all this gets distorted, right?
Yeah, it does. And you describe something really interesting about the empty room and then the filters that come through. And often those can be learned behaviors.
Mm,
And we learn them through our life. And when I said you can change things, you can unlearn some of these things, then the stepping back helps you to unlearn some of them. So if your automatic reaction, that happens in a millisecond, this emotion that then drives the decision making and behavior, if you can catch that and examine it, then you can start to unlearn some of those behaviors
nice.
from what you've had in the past. And you know by working on ourselves, by looking for these auto reactions to things that drive things, we can start to change our future in many, many things. And like I said earlier on, the when you don't have experiences, sometimes you're relying upon the nearest thing, and the nearest thing might be a learned behavior that just isn't quite right for that situation.
It's interesting.
So learned behaviors can be, they can be difficult things. They can really get into the way of lots of things that are going on. Yeah.
Something that I explored during my it wasn't a PhD, it was a DBA, so applied PhD rather than just talk to the theory side and do academic papers. This is like, well, to achieve the DBA, to the doctorate, it was to actually apply this in the real world. And what I found fascinating is why that could you get somebody that's trained in something and then get a totally different result from you get two different people, two different subjects. They're both trained exactly the same, both the same organization, everything is the same. And then what happened is that one person would have a different result. And we did this across like 300 people. And then what we found is that there was all different results. So what was it that was actually changing everything? And we looked at people's traits. These are things that are very hard to change in people and what made them who they are. We don't really want to change that, but is it traits that were making a difference? But what we actually found, Eugene, was that it was people's state that was making the difference,
Uh-huh.
which is the emotional stuff. However, the problem with states is it's very difficult to train and develop because we could go through all the training in the world. And me and you are from around Birmingham. We get on the M6, and somebody cuts us up, or even when we go on the way to work, maybe our dog gets run over or something like that. It can easily shift someone's state, and that color of that room can be a different color before we even turn up into the office. So what we
Yeah.
looked at is, if you imagine the continuum of state versus trait, there was stuff that happened towards the side of the state stuff that was more developable. So how do organizations develop this so that you've got 1,000 people in a company, and if straight away 50% of them are having a bad day, that's a massive drop in performance because they just don't feel like having a good day today. So it's a big impact on businesses, but they're not paying enough attention to it. Now, what I love about what you're saying here is that with a few strategies like what you've just mentioned, step back, have a good think about it, understand, understanding self thoughts and behaviors. This is developmental stuff that can make a big impact in performance if someone was doing stuff on a higher level state of who they're truly meant to be at their full potential.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I just ruined your seminar, by the way. Is that exactly what you're talking about?
No, it's exactly right. Psychological state is something that's in flux all the time. And it's driven by, as I said, past experiences, current experience, how the day's been. You
Mm.
wouldn't expect two people to have exactly the same results. We're humans, right? We have different experiences, different paths. Our brains are very different.
But Eugene,
Um,
I'm going to be conflicted right now because this makes great content, by the way. Um, isn't that, though, the solution that AI delivers? Is it gives us consistency rather than the ups and downs of humans?
well, if you think that AI is completely consistent, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. It's You can ask it the same question twice, and
Right.
even just changing one word in a question can affect the outcome that you get. It's it can be really helpful, but it's often how you ask it. It's not there yet. It's not as sophisticated as a brain. I think there is a consistency to it, and there probably is a consistency in AI for transactional business. But we're talking about something much more complex, and human emotions and the way that we operate as a person. I'm glad it's not all completely the same, because what a world that would be, because we'd all be robots, wouldn't we?
Exactly. That was being a little conflict in there with you, but there is always a place for humans, and when it comes to actual sales and marketing, which is my field and what I really enjoy with the analytics and the data side around it, there's a clear difference between human to human interaction and human to robot, even human to company. Look at Richard Branson and Virgin. You find out how many followers Richard Branson has compared to his company Virgin on LinkedIn. The data there is hugely significant. Like, you can see that I think it's like 10x the amount of followers that he's got as a personal brand, because people want to be dealing with humans.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, you cite one of these people who are an amazing entrepreneur who thought and acted differently to most people around him in his time. Yeah, wonderful person. But yeah, we're not all the same, are we? Thank goodness. And we're not always consistent either, which is an interesting thing, because we don't always make the same decision. But as I said earlier, sometimes conditions are just slightly different when you're making one decision compared to another.
So there's a big gap between perception and reality, really, isn't there? So at what point does internal thinking become unreliable, do you think?
Well, it has to. Yeah, that's a good question, that, because perception and reality are often a difficult thing. The way we perceive things drives behavior, and that can be distorted, as I said before, by past behaviors, by past experiences, and by current circumstance. So you talk about state at the moment, that can very much affect the decision at that particular time. It's When is it unreliable? I think it's maybe unreliable. I guess my answer to that might be it's unreliable when you don't have a good handle on the emotions that are happening. When the emotions start to escalate, to take over, to color and influence the decisions, then that's when it becomes unreliable. And those emotions it might be, sheer fear. It might be stress that's driving that. It might be many other different things. It could be anger. It could be something that's really sometimes overly positive, that we overestimate based on a positivity. We think that the outcome is going to be much better than it is, and naturally it actually isn't. So that's what we might call the overconfidence, underconfidence effect. So it's colored by our overconfidence around something, that sometimes it sort of looks a bit arrogant when we're overconfident, but sometimes for ourselves we have this thing called the overconfidence underconfidence effect, where we overestimate positive things and we underestimate difficult things. And that's important I think for entrepreneurs and for people in business, because we think that the easy things are going to be easier than they are, and we think that the hard things, the difficult things, are going to be harder than they are. I did some research on this when I was studying psychology. We looked at how people look at mathematical equations, and they overestimate how many they're going to get right on the easy ones, and they underestimate how many they will get right on the difficult ones.
Wow.
And that can be applied to lots of situations. So when things are difficult, we often apply this. And I've seen this so many times, particularly, overconfidence around easy things, and they don't turn out to be as easy as you might expect them to be, and that can lead to failure or difficulties. And sometimes the really difficult things are not anywhere near as hard, because if you approach it in a kind of slow, easy way, you can get past it. It feels like a big thing, but it's if you work with it and you work in a logical way, you can get past it. So overconfidence, yeah, it sort of gets it gets a little bit annoying at times when you see overconfidence around things.
Yeah. Yeah. So you worked in large organizations, and you work for large organizations in consulting capacities now. Um, you know, I'm sure you do a large element of that is going to be coaching as opposed to just consulting as well. So, we're both. I do more SME business coaching. You do with the larger companies, and I'm pretty sure you'll agree on this. Is that yeah? Okay. Will AI ever take a business coach's job? Well, you can go on there and you can get some answers from it. You can get the strategy from it. You can go and watch loads of YouTube videos. But the real people that invest, I mean, we've still got jobs, right? Large companies are investing us for a reason. And that's
Yeah,
because this is all great having strategy. And we're like, okay, but how are you going to do that when your arse is on fire like it is every time I see you? Well, how are you gonna do that when you've got a HR challenge that's going on that you never expected? How are you gonna do that when you can't afford to pay the payroll this month? And these are the real
yeah.
decisions that a lot of people don't recognize, that I feel that AI consulting, coaching, whatever is not there. And I think this is where real mentors need to come in to say, look, we've been there and seen this stuff happen, and this stuff is all good on paper and in theory, but when emotional decision making is happening, when imposter syndrome is kicking in, when we've got to make decisions under pressure because of all these stresses that are happening, are you really going to show up as that person? And a lot of the time, a lot of the clients that I and probably yourself work with, it actually just turns into that person just needs a partner to be talking to right now to get through a situation, to actually execute on this. What's your take on this when you're dealing with your sort of clients?
Oh, there are so many things in there I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Absolutely loads. Um, one of the real important things, before I forget, is a question to ask yourself: is how do I want to show up today?
Mm, mm,
And that's the, and that can be also applied to how do I want to show up for this meeting? How do I want us to show up to this sales pitch? And if you can work through that, that can really help you with lots of other things. Now, coaches can really help by asking the difficult questions, I guess, that AI maybe is not there at a position to ask it. I think it can be helpful using AI to ask it for some strategies around what questions might be asked of you, or what might that other person think about that situation, because that gives you an external view that maybe you're not necessarily seeing. But I think that human to human is really, really important, because we can see differently. Now, you and I are not in the same room, which is unfortunate. It would be great if we were. I think we get slightly different cues when we're together. We get different cues when we can see each other, and there's a skill to getting cues, and feedback that you're listening to, when you're just working on voice alone. So that's a very different skill in itself, and human to human can pick up a lot more of those things, because we've evolved in an amazing way to be, without even thinking about cues, without even thinking about how things look, how they are to us, what that person's, how their body language is, how they're moving towards us, the tone of their voice. The AI can never be like that. So when you're coaching with someone, you pick up all of that other stuff. And I'm not sure that a conversation when you're asking one of the AI bots about a situation, it's ever really going to pick up imposter syndrome, for example, unless you specifically ask some questions around it. And I see a lot of that. There's a lot of imposter syndrome. it's it's not even a new thing that's been around. It goes back to the late 70s, that when the first research was published around it, and it just makes so much sense. This idea that, like I said at really early on, that we're overcritical of ourselves. I mean, imposter syndrome isn't just that, but it's thinking that we're not as good as other people see us to be, and we can be overcritical. We can, even when we ask for help, we think that there's some kind of failure in that, because we should know the answers to absolutely everything. And so imposter syndrome is something we probably all have a bit of. And if it really starts to get in the way of who you are and what you're trying to do, it can become very punishing, really, that we become overly critical of ourselves, and we see ourselves in a very negative way. And actually, people outside see you very differently to that. They see you in a really good light. You're doing good things, you're making great decisions, you're operating in a great way, but we see ourselves as an imposter, that we're just not good enough for compared to other people around us.
It's really interesting. And it happens at all levels as well. So I've got a good friend of mine, medical health genius when it comes to male hormone, like data, the technology around it, the way that it's going, longevity, vitality. Is an absolute genius in the world. He's been involved with some of the top people in the world. And he called me the other day. Good friends of mine. We talk like once a week, probably like 9 p.m. That was nice because he's just around the world all the time. And he called me. He said, "I'm just getting off a private jet right now, and I'm just a guy from I think it was some place in Birmingham." He said, "I'm just a kid from Birmingham, Lewis." He says, "And I'm being shipped around to New York now to speak to some very famous people. Can't mention the names, very famous people, and." It's getting to me. And I'm like, pal, you're being shipped around in a private jet around the world, flew around the world to be in New York right now because of who you are. They need you more than you need them. Just remember that, who you are. But I think
Good
that
advice.
brings a good level of humility to it. And this is very similar to what you were saying about overconfidence versus underconfidence. And also, where does the mix of ego come in? Because sometimes
Ooh.
I need to behave in a way that, look, I am being shipped over to New York, and I've got to show these possible investors that this is the best thing that they need to invest in. But it's not just looking at the product; they're looking at the person behind it as well. And if I'm underconfident, I better start to
Yeah.
show more. But what about if the investor thinks I've got too much ego about me, then they confuse that for overconfidence. And it's all these cues that you're mentioning, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they're all really important. It's, you see the analogy of the the swan serene on the top and paddling underneath furiously, and that can be the inner dialogue that happens for a lot of us, in any situation that can get in the way, that can become punishing to us. Not that I'm saying the inner dialogue should be boosting your ego all the time, telling you how good you are, but I think there are times when you do need to remind yourself that you've got here and you're in a good place and you've earned this and you're doing good things, and look at your achievements and look at what you want to do going forward, and use that, the past to fuel your future.
Right.
That,
A lot of
that
people have
become really
vision boards,
important.
don't they? They have vision boards and big goals, and they look at their vision board every day. That's step one. It fuels me. I do journaling every morning for this sort of reason. Self-sabotage kicks in, imposter syndrome kicks in, and I have to like get this shit off my head onto a piece of paper whilst looking at
That's
the
a good
vision board of
good
who I need.
strategy.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
this is who I need to become to achieve those things on that vision. However, I do also think that a big part of it that I don't really notice as much is that you don't just want a vision board, but you want an achievements board as well. To remember that you are on that journey, you are doing it. This is what you've done, and it's a lot more than a lot of other people have done in your unique situation.
Yeah. you're many times more likely to remember bad things than the
Right.
good things.
Okay. You just opened up another can of worms there, Eugene. Thank you for
Yeah.
that. Tell us a bit of context to that.
And they sit there, like dark clouds and follow you around. Or you have a mental rucksack that you're throwing stuff in, and it's getting heavier and heavier, and you
Mm.
forget to have all of the really good things around you that are going to compensate for that you can offset. Yes, it's interesting how we remember bad more than good, and except when it comes to the weather when we were kids long time ago. Of course, I always remember summers being great, and I don't remember all of the bad things. So that rule that I said doesn't always apply to everything, because there are some things that we remember in a kind of rose tinted kind of
But
way.
that's
So
nostalgia, isn't it? And I think there's actually science around it that things that happened longer ago seem better than they actually were.
yeah, yeah, the further away they get, the less you are able to remember the all of the emotions at that particular time, and that
Uh,
can be quite good, because we maybe not want to remember
mm,
some difficult stuff from the past, but we can put it in a context in a different way. I
that's right.
think, stacking up those good things, and boosting our egos in some ways, and recognizing our achievements are really important. I like that you talk about journaling. I think, when I talked about stepping back, you could do that through a journal. You can write down, and then writing down and looking at it is another form of stepping back, because you're approaching it in a different way. And if you can apply that curiosity to it, so you write down what happened, um, in your journal, but actually, if you ask then those questions about why was that happening, what was I thinking, what emotions were happening for me, what drove those decisions, you can start to journal in a very kind of self-reflective way. And I think it's important to develop self-reflection across your life. And that doesn't mean, sitting cross-legged and trying to meditate in some way, although I'm a believer in that,
Yeah.
um, as a mind calmer.
Mm.
But it's about, reflecting on what happens for us, and what that was all about, so that we can change the future in some way. We can react differently, or we can do the same thing more of. It's Let's not be all the negative, because there are times when we have a really great result, and we should reflect upon that as well, as like, what happened, how did that go, how did I show up, how did I approach that situation, what worked, what could I do better next time. We teach a lot of that in business anyway, don't we? What worked, what didn't work. It's kind of how you do that feedback part. What we could do more of, what could we improve for next time. Those are they should be fairly standard things that we know how to do, I would expect, in business.
Yeah, yeah. My own companies, we do that once a quarter. So we'll get to pay. So I think it's Brian Tracy, actually. I love Brian Tracy. Yeah. He's old school, and he said that once a quarter, get the team out for a day away from the business. We call it strategy planning, where we get our next quarterly plans together. But to be honest, Eugene, it's more about getting the team together and reflecting what went well, what didn't go so well, what we're going to put behind us or put in front of us the next quarter. That's the whole gist of it. But that's done over a day, and then once a year we have 2 days away
Yep.
to have a good reflection on what the wins were, celebrate the wins, lock them all in. But the other way from that is to also go, okay, do we have a morning a month, and then every week is there a good huddle where we can reflect on this, probably daily as well. But this is what you're mentioning, right? A lot of organizations, the stuff we've just spoke about, everybody who's got this far in the podcast right now, mostly will be business owners, entrepreneurs, or professionals stepping into those roles. They will all agree that this is beneficial stuff that will have an impact on their people. And
Yes.
look, that correlation is, if you get happier people, better state people, higher performing people, you will get better results. It's
Yep.
just a given, right?
Yeah.
So we don't need to go into the detail of all of that, but at the end of the day, people need to pay commercial for us as coaches and consultants and mentors to come in. They have to see a return in this as well. Do you feel that that's where the return is in the impact for companies financially? I mean, give this to an accounts department, they'll go, "What are we paying for that for?"
Yeah, yeah.
You've probably seen that quite a lot, yeah?
Well, people are a huge part of the business, right? And high performing people are important.
Mm,
So you describe very much the effect of all forms of kind of operation and personal well-being and culture in the organization. They all have an output, and good work and good places to work are really important. People getting together, that's part of the culture. It's part of developing deeper relationships. It's part of being able to work together in a different way than when you're just purely remote. I think it's been more difficult for people, since the pandemic, and that's a good way behind us now, but it did change the world quite a lot, where people are now, and it's not uncommon to be hired remotely, work remotely, and almost never have a human to human relationship with your colleagues. And I'm not criticizing that, because there's definitely been a move in lots of businesses to get more people back to work, because there's a recognition that people being together are important. And having people around you is important for your work, but it's also important for your development, because like we said earlier, you can see examples of how other people do things, good and bad. You can get some mini coaching that can happen. And I think, the cultural aspects of how organizations develop can be much more deeper embedded when you've got people working together. It can still be done remotely, but it's much more difficult, I think, to achieve. And we probably don't have time to delve into all of that, but I think that humans working together, as you described, getting together in huddles, even small huddles, is something that I've seen a lot in businesses that helps you. That's not like the football team where you all put your arms around each other and say positive affirmations and
depends on the
then move
company.
on. It's not quite like that, but it's about having a logical approach to it.
Yes.
What's happening, what needs to be done,
Mm.
what's going on currently. You could have some really quick communication, who's in, who's not in, what have we got going on today, what do we need to look out for. They're all really helpful things.
It's all part of the
And
culture as well, like you say. I mean, the other
yeah,
day I went into one of the manufacturing companies, and there was a bit of friction that I saw that was happening on the shop floor. So I went over there, and there's some very talented, skilled carpenters, and I brought the one into the room, and it was no sort of trouble or anything like that. I just like, I need some feedback from you here, because you're the people that are out there experiencing it, and I'm sitting on the investor level, and my SLT team sit in the middle of it. Give me some feedback on the SLT team. And he went, there's just not enough communication. And I went, so how do we put something in that so that doesn't exist? Because that's not what I want this business to be known for. But there's a few issues there from an owner. Is like, have I put the right culture in place? Have I put the right strategy in place for communication to appear in a safe, psychological safe environment? It comes down to like culture, behavior, bit like what we were saying about the emotions in ourselves and how our thoughts then shift into our own behaviors. It works on an organizational level as well.
yep, yeah,
Yeah.
it can change the states that you're in.
Mm,
You can tell even when you're speaking to somebody, in a service environment, for example. You can tell even over the telephone when
mm.
somebody is disinterested or not engaged, or you can tell, even like with I talked about cues, you can tell when you're in front of them, because you can see their anger or disinterest or whatever. um, and yeah, that can say a lot about the culture of an organization. Probably many of us have experienced these kind of negatives when we've dealt with organizations, but a lot of us will have seen really great experiences as well, really good organizations where you can see people are, I wanted to say happy in their job, I don't mean that exactly, where people are fully engaged, where people are enjoying their work. And you can feel that's something very different. And it affects, ultimately all of these things affect the customer. So a
Wow.
negative environment affect the customer in terms of the outcome. And if you think it doesn't, absolutely, you'd be wrong in that, because people pick up on it. They don't always name it, and don't necessarily name it at the time and say, oh, I had a bad experience. They just maybe just come away from that interaction with not the same positivity that they would if it was a great interaction. And they don't always name that either, but they're probably more likely to say it wasn't a great one than when it is a great one.
Well, it's Peter Drucker, so he's like the godfather of management, isn't he, in the science world? And he said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Yeah,
I love stuff like that.
I'm full of things like that. Yeah, I think I read a lot of books, and then I'm like, where are all these quotes coming from? But they're ingrained in my subconscious brain, I think, from what me and you do. So, from an organisational impact, then, just to leave the listeners, they're not all going to be large organisations. They could be, but a lot of the listeners here tend to be between 10 to 50 sort of people, businesses ranging between 1 to 10 million, or aspiring to be at that level. What sort of practical things would you leave today for owners, entrepreneurs, leaders, that they could walk away with based on what we spoke about?
Well, I think, look out for imposter syndrome. We talked about that. Mm-hmm. So if you find that
in you or in people,
both, I think it's, as a leader, you may well be experiencing. I nearly said you probably are. I think I nearly reached all the way to that. Probably says more about me than it does about everything else. But
it's being conscious, isn't it, and aware that this stuff happens.
Yeah, it's being conscious when it's happening. So look out for that. I think overall, I think that whole thing about being overconfident and underconfident in situations, I think, is really important. But don't be so overconfident that you're perceived as arrogant. I think it's great to have confidence and it's great to have ego, but being over the top with that can really appear to be arrogant, and that's a big turn off to many people. It's like you said earlier, you're doing business with people often, and you're feeling that person.
And by the way, Eugene, I always think being vulnerable and real is what
human is.
But it can
human
also
leadership.
Well, that can also. I've met people before that talk about vulnerable stories and how they were like relatable. And this is bullshit. Come on, get rid of that script. And let's just be really in the moment.
Well, in the moment is a really important part. We're on to a whole other subject now. Being here and now, I think, is really important, as opposed to being in a different place. And giving attention to a moment, and giving attention to a person, I think is quite important. You talked about organizations and things going on and people happening in their lives. That can distract from being in the moment with that particular person. What I think you get better at is learning how to be in that moment with that particular person. One of my bugbears that happens, I think, in business and in meetings is phones and laptops being present. And you can see it sometimes. And so if I'm sitting like this, right, and I'm watching and we're having a conversation, but you can see me doing this, typing, I'm not really being in the moment with you, am I? If you can see me reading my emails like this, I'm moving my head on purpose, but adjust my eyes, I'm not really giving you the attention that you should deserve. So being in the moment, I think, is respectful, is human, is important for you to pick up all of the information. And I think it's quite important to be in the moment, with our emotions and things that are happening too. So that might be another thing. And my other tip, that, as I said earlier, is having the ability or thinking about being able to step back, become that curious observer, curious scientist, look at the situation. So something happens, we take a step back from it, we think about it logically in a different way, and then we choose how we're going to move forward, rather than letting the emotion choose how we have moved forward already. So that's it's a really important part of, you know, being a leader, being in business, being, you know, in any business, is having that ability to not overreact to a situation, being so driven by the emotion, good and bad, and choosing our way forward. And the last thing is, like I said before, choosing how I'm going to show up and who I want to be today.
Yeah, because it's okay having all these big goals, but if you can't, I like the journey of becoming Eugene. You know, these goals aren't a reality yet because of I'm not that person yet, or I am that person, or I'm becoming that person. But it's okay that if you've got pressures and you're feeling it, pressure's a good thing. It's growth.
Yeah, yeah,
You need
of
to
course.
become that person. You can't just click your fingers, Tony Robbins style, and yeah, you can start to believe it. That can give you the self, you know, the self efficacy to move forward through it. But you've got to experience this stuff. I mean, I've never done a skydive; scares me. But there's people that do it because they just they can't jump in a plane. They're crazy, but they've done it 100 times, and it's nothing to them
Yeah,
anymore. And it's a bit like being in these positions as entrepreneurs, C-suite. You know, it can be new, and you're always facing new challenges year on
yeah,
year on year, and that's okay to embrace that. And if these pressures start to break, then like you mentioned at the start, it can start to really change our decisions around how we act as leaders and who we're showing up as in the moment.
yeah. And if they become so overwhelming, you know, that we begin to break down, to become burnt out, then, you know, we have to think about how we can do it slightly differently.
Mm,
You know, the difficulty I think in business right now is, it's like we said earlier, it's so fast, it's so quick moving. It's difficult to slow it completely down. You've got to find ways to adapt, to overcome, to move forward with things, and not be broken. And you know, sometimes we carry too much of it around with us, so we let the day affect us, and we carry that. I talked about that mental rucksack. We put it in our bag and we carry it around with us, or we take it home, or we take it to the next meeting. You know, this being able to let some of these things go, I think are really important parts of not dwelling on them. Reflection is right, as I said. I do like reflection, but not, you know, not lying in bed at night trying to change a situation in your head, because I've never been able to do that, because it's already
and
happened.
you've just hit so many people's relatableness there as business owners of lying in bed at night, and not always for the negative. They could have a great spark of an idea, you know, 3 a.m. in the morning, and overthinking. You can't do nothing right there.
No, overthinking can get in the way, and sometimes your gut is just the perfect thing to go with, because
God.
that's built on experience. It's not, you know, it's not actually your gut, is it? It's built on a whole load of things. But you know, the I've never changed a situation, or what I've said about something, by thinking it, by going over it and over it and over it. What I've got to do is put that away. I've got to think about, you know, what could I do differently next time? What was happening?
Mhm,
Like I said before, what was happening for me at that time? How
mm,
can I change that for the future? But I can't change what's already happened. I've never been able to do it. I never will be able to do it. And carrying it around and trying to change it in my head is never going to work. So if we approach it in a more positive, kind of reflective way, we can use it, as opposed to it just churning around in our head. and
so it's a bit
and
like, you know, put these journal times in, make sure that becomes a habit to reflect on it. Like I mentioned,
yeah,
the daily habit, the weekly habit, the monthly habit, the quarterly planet, the yearly planet planning. Um, but also that this has got to be a micro thing as well. Micro reflections when somebody gives you some, you know, somebody heated in a meeting, or you're feeling the pressure, or you're about to say something you're not supposed to say. Micro reflections can kick in. I'm just gonna run to the toilet. You know, take a quick break, wash your hands, come back, That's 10 seconds, 30 seconds that it might have took just to wash your hands. That could be a micro reflection that really changes the outcome of any business decision. So the previous person that we had on this, by the way, was um, went out on Tuesday. Is David Kahn. He was from marketing, and we spoke about a lot about business growth and about how marketing is an investment that we have to find. Otherwise, business growth stalls if there's no commerciality coming into the business. However, this isn't the other end of the spectrum from this podcast we're talking with you, Eugene, because when that marketing starts to kick in and the people have more work to do, it's really going to be a display and test on your culture to see how you operate under pressure. So this stuff now, culture can't happen by accident. It's got to happen by purpose, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you got to drive the culture, and you can change a culture from a bad one to a good one. So, I think, considering the culture of the business is really important. Uh, uh, you know, Back to that question, how do I want my business to be?
Mm.
How do I want it to feel? How do I want my customers to experience my business? How do I want them to feel having a transaction with my business? How do I want my employees to interact with my customers? How do I want my customers to feel about my employees after that
And
particular
is this all
situation?
documented then, Eugene? Would you suggest that business owners, because the challenge here is that business owners that are in the 9 to 5 operations of their business now, so the business needs them, they haven't got to the stage yet that the business can start to operate without them having to be there. Um, that's okay to reinforce culture when you're there. But what happens when you're not able to be there because you've got more businesses or you're investing in businesses or the business is now an asset and it's providing you without having to be there? That culture is really going to get put to the test again. What do you do with culture? Do you document it? Do you yeah, big question mark. What would you do?
That's a great question. I'd go back to what you were talking about earlier about having days out and
Mm,
reflecting on things. And strategy is really important, and strategy, in terms of the business plan, but having a reflection and a strategy around the culture of the business, how it wants to feel, how it wants to operate, how all the things I just said are how the customers experience your business. Put that into a piece of strategy in an away day and talk about how did our culture work, over the last quarter. How did our culture
nice.
operate right now? How is our culture going forward? What did we say we wanted our culture to look, feel, operate like, and how is it measuring up to that? What are we getting back in terms of feedback from our customers? What are the words that are using around how we operate, how they experience us, and really looking at those and measuring them up against what you were aiming to do. And if it's not measuring up, if we're not getting there, then what do we need to do to change that, to make sure it is that? Because you really good culture businesses, ones that have got a really strong culture, that's great. It doesn't need the person, the leader there all the time to drive that, because the culture becomes a thing in itself, and it's like, this is how we are, this is what we do, this is how we feel about things, this is how we operate. So it becomes self-sustaining in many ways. We have to just watch that it doesn't go off course. But
Yeah.
really good cultures can work without the leader being there driving it all the time. They should work.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Okay, so thank you for these. Any listeners that are listening now, if you'd like to leave anything for Eugene in the comments on Spotify, then maybe there's some extra questions that you've had from today that you've got for Eugene. Remember to put them into the comments, and we can get Eugene back on as well to answer any of your questions in the future. So, Eugene, thank you for sharing all this information with us. There's been some key learnings for me in this as well, and thanks for coming on and mentoring on the Mental Business Podcast.
Lewis, thank you for this, and it's been a great experience. I've enjoyed it. I feel like we could talk for another couple of hours, but let's save some for the future.
You're turning psychology here into practical, real world results that are big problems that businesses will face. Maybe not when they're achieving their first 100K, but look, get to a million, get to 10 million, get to 100 million. These are going to be things that really, really going to affect every part of the business, whether it is the finding great people and keeping great people, paying great people, finding great customers, getting the great customers for the right value. It all ties in. So thank you, Eugene. It's and that's just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? What I've mentioned there, but
It is.
yeah, thank you.